Hello, everybody, and welcome to What's the Story podcast. This is WTS 344. My name's Danny Murray.
I'm Graham Merrigan. How are you, Danny?
I'm doing good, Graham Merrigan. You're under the weather.
I am. Bit of a head cold, bit of a cough.
Yeah.
An inconvenience and an annoyance. Thank you.
Yeah, I would imagine so, especially coming into this time of year. You know, the weather starting to pick up. You probably want to be outside more, not feeling miserable.
Out
You
and
know,
about.
indeed, indeed. Yeah, look, I head colds are one of those things that I hate anything that makes you like just miserable enough that you still have to do all your normal things
Yeah.
and you're just miserable doing it, but you're not like unwell enough to like, cancel or get to stay home sick, that kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Get back into bed.
Exactly, exactly. I'd love to get back into bed. Jesus.
Those days are gone, Dan.
Long gone, Graham.
Yeah.
Long gone, unfortunately.
Haley took made sure of that.
She was an absolute nightmare last night, I can tell you. Woke up at 2 in the morning, half three, decided to go back to sleep. Woke up again at 5 and said, "We're awake now, everyone, the house, we're awake." And honestly, I have my Google search does include, "Can you sell a baby to a circus?" And
How much did I
apparently,
get?
apparently you can't anymore.
Oh God,
Oh,
progressive times.
I tell you now, woke Graham, the woke virus.
Woke virus, woke nonsense that you can't sell your child anymore.
I know, yeah. Faucet's, Duffy's, whichever one. I was happy to go to either of them, but apparently you can't anymore. So, but anyway, yeah.
Speaking of a circus,
Oh,
the
nice.
the US regime. Do you want to bring us into who we are talking to this week?
Hey, America, for a man with a head cold who doesn't want to necessarily be doing this kind of carry on, that is a segue of all segues. Good man. Yeah, look, the world, as we've been saying constantly over the last while, is a kip. It's a mess. And a huge part of that kip and a huge part of that mess is due to, uh, certainly in myself and Graham's opinion, the White House and those who are in the corridors of power within the White House and the type of characters who they are cozying up to on the global stage, Bibi Netanyahu included. Um, but as always, me and Mero like to challenge ourselves and we like to look at it from the point of view of we are 99% opinion, 1% news. Hilary McGann is somebody who breaks things down with accuracy and she breaks things down in a way that's accessible and real. Me and Mero will do our best to drag her into opinions, but she will stick to very much what is factual and known as opposed to speculative. She's one of our favourite guests. We always get a great reaction when we talk to her. So let's not delay any further. Let's go over to Boston and be joined by the brilliant News by Hill. It's Hilary McGann. I am delighted to say that Hilary joins us now. Hill, welcome back. And before we get into all the newsy bits and bobs and all that crack, huge congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It feels like a long time since we've caught up. I love coming onto this podcast, and yeah, there's been a few life changes since I last spoke to you guys. Had a lovely baby nearly 9 months ago, and took a huge step back from the news. I took about a 6 month break, and so
Yeah.
what's nice about it now is I feel like I'm kind of trying to catch up, like all of us. Just figuring it out
Yeah.
every day.
How was the sleep?
I don't know if I should answer that because a lot of people are not going to like me.
Oh
I have a
no,
baby.
you're not one then that's like, oh, my baby's sleeping great.
I won't answer the question.
Hill,
Danny was
Very lucky.
googling how to sell my child to
So-
the circus before
so
he came on. So
we have Haley turns 1 this month, and I haven't had a full night's sleep since before she arrived. And last night, I was saying to Mero before you joined us last night, she just decided to choose violence with her sleep, and there's
Okay.
no amount of coffee in the world that will perk me up. So I now have to, just as is the way these things go, I have to really dislike you for the next little while, just because you're like, yeah, I sleep, it's great.
Oh, you poor thing. But let me offer you a silver lining here because a lot of people
Yeah.
say they're like, just you wait, our second child is going to be a terrorist. Whereas you might, the bar might be set so low that you're maybe you'll have a sleep for the next one. Fingers
I,
crossed.
I don't know. With two huskies and one child in the house, I think we're at capacity. I'm not going. So, but
Fair
that
enough.
actually that's another question. Then, how has Bree taken to the role of having a younger sibling?
Do you know what? It's been a wave, right? So she was absolutely adorable at the beginning. It was the best thing ever. And if Hugo cried, she'd be looking at me, and if I didn't immediately get up, she was looking at me, being like, "Are you serious? Like, what are we doing?" And she just was besotted by him. But I think that novelty did probably wear off around 6 weeks. She was like, "Oh, right, okay, this is like here to stay. This thing is here to stay." And so there was a bit of depression. I'm not gonna lie. Our vet was like, if you see any signs of depression, my husband was like, depression. She's a golden doodle. Like, what are we talking about? But lately we've kind of come back around again because Hugo started eating food, and his thing that he absolutely adores is steak, which is very expensive. But I find Brie just absolutely waiting under the high chair now, knowing there's going to be a piece of steak just flung over for her. So again, they're starting to bond again, but it's slow and steady, I would say.
That's
We had an
yeah.
issue. We had an issue with my dog and my niece, and my niece was probably about 9 months old, and my dog was going down for his yearly vaccinations, and the vet was like, "Oh, he looks like he's after putting on some timber. What have you changed?" I said, "We haven't changed anything." And we were kind of going, "What have we changed? We haven't changed a single thing. Gets the same treat every day, the same meals every
Yeah.
day." And then a week or so later, I'm in the park, and his old vet, we bump into, and she's giving him loads of cuddles. And I said, your old job have us on a food watch with him, so we can't figure out how he's put on weight." And she was like, "Oh, look, he looks fine. Don't worry about it too much. But is there a new baby in the house at all?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah. Why? But does she give him food off the high chair?" I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "That's what it is." And I was like, "You're fucking kidding me." So I was like, "We have to get rid of the baby."
Yeah,
Last one in, first one out.
Yeah,
well, that's
exactly.
it. Yeah, but the dogs learn very, very quickly where to strategically position themselves when food is getting flung overboard. But
Absolutely.
it's a great bonding. It's a great bonding tool for them all. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, Hill, we're delighted that you are back doing what you do. So absolutely congratulations. But Booked In is back, and I've listened to. I think you've got 3 or 4 episodes out. I've listened to two of them.
Yeah.
Jane, oh, what's her name?
Jane Ferguson.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Fascinating woman.
Yeah, she's amazing. So Jane Ferguson is a correspondent, right? And she's from Northern Ireland, and she is just, to be honest with you, the way I describe her, she's just a badass. She's so
Yeah.
inspiring to me, and she's doing a job that I know I couldn't do. So she was doing the most risky assignments all around the world, and specifically, I think a lot in Syria and Yemen,
Yeah.
Afghanistan, and really put her life on the line many times. But has such a beautiful. What impresses me the most about her is she's just a really beautiful approach to her career, to her journalism. She knows what her role is, and she has this awareness about the industry and the difference between this journalism that you think is really impactful and really really important, and the industry you're serving as well. And it's just really fascinating to get her insights. She wrote a memoir called No Ordinary Assignment. And because I have this podcast, so Booked In, I interview different authors once a week, and as you can imagine, I consume a lot of books, and I've listened to a lot of memoirs, and I enjoy most of them because I appreciate anybody telling their story. But you can always tell when someone has held back. They've given you 80%. And a lot of times people hold back out of fear of offending somebody else. It's just
Hmm.
they just don't want to make it awkward for someone else. And Jane, in a very beautiful way, just lays it all out there. And a lot of it's uncomfortable. Like, I felt uncomfortable hearing bits about her family. I can't imagine how they felt, but I appreciated it because at the end of the day, a memoir is trying to understand who a person is, what motivates them, what got them to where they are today. And at the end of the memoir, I was like, I get her. I wholeheartedly understand her and all her motivations. And I think books like that are just really, really important. So I'm glad you listened to the episode. But she's an amazing woman.
Yeah, it was. I found there's a bit where she talks about her aunt who was very very good to her in her kind
Mm.
of younger life or whatever. But the bit you kind of touched on it, these assignments that she was on, and I kind of was it Syria or where it was she said, but she went and she's talking about it, but she said like that she had to get out of there. But the next journalist that went in to replace her to go in after her sadly was killed over there. And
Yeah, Marie Colvin.
yeah, and I was just like, gee, like that would weigh heavy on anyone, you'd imagine. Like that kind of thing where you're like, there but for the grace of God kind of thing, you know? But brilliant, brilliant listen. So
Thank you.
that I'm in the middle of the original Sin, the Jake Tapper one. But I'm queuing up then for the next one. So as I said, booked in
Oh,
is
brilliant. Well, actually, so yesterday I did another interview with a guy called Ellie Honig, right? So that's going to be out
yeah,
in, I think, two weeks' time. And he wrote a brilliant book. He's the chief legal analyst at CNN, and he wrote a book called When You Come at the King, which is a very timely read because it looks at all of the presidents from Richard Nixon right up to Donald Trump today and all of their different relationships, battles, tensions, fractures with the Justice Department. And as you can imagine, there's no shortage of content and stories and scandals. And it was just really fascinating to chat to him, and the differences of how polarized, I suppose, the US has become. And so his
yeah,
perspective is fascinating. I have this like, it's like you guys, you have people on that you just like chatting to, and I just love to listen. I mean, it's weird, almost like on the other side of the mic today, and I have to chat a little bit more. I love sometimes just to sit back and listen to people. I find them just fascinating. So it's one of those things. I'm sure you feel the same way. It's just, I don't even look at it as a job. It's like a joy and a privilege to have this, really, to have that platform and chat to people just about different topics. And whatever comes into my mind or whatever's in the news cycle, there's a book about it. So I just find that most of my time I'm just hounding people, being like, please talk to me. I think you're really interesting. So I love it. It's a joy, and I'm really delighted I brought it back. I was nervous to, but really, really happy it's back.
no, yeah, as our way. So continued success with that. And I suppose you gave us a nice, you teed up a nice segue for us there, and that is the polarization of America. Like you live in Boston. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what is just the general atmosphere like over there at the moment? As you're out and about, you're popping into the shops, you're going for coffee, whatever it is. Like, are people just kind of like, yeah, whatever, life goes on, or is there a bit of a tension in the air given everything going on?
I don't know really, to be honest. Like, I think about it in two different ways. I think about my day to day life here in Boston, in a city that is really has always voted Democrat. Like,
Yeah.
it's in large part like the people around you are Democrats. They're also very well educated people who, for the most part, care about what's happening in the world. They don't just look at domestic news; they look at international headlines. So I suppose the conversations are different, and I want to be respectful and appreciative and appreciate the fact that uh, America is so vast. There are so many different types of America, so many different cultures in America. And so oftentimes I'm looking at the headlines and thinking about it in the same way that you guys are across the Atlantic. Sometimes it does actually feel that far removed. What I would say to you, what has been, I suppose, one of the most fascinating things for me is the amount of people that, if you talk about politics at all, make it very clear that they feel quite politically homeless right now. And they
Right.
just don't feel that they align that they align wholeheartedly to one side or the other. I mean, even actually, to be honest with you, Usha Vance, second lady, JD Vance's wife, did an interview the other day, and she kind of had an undertone of saying the same thing. She was a Democrat before. And so you think if somebody that's married to the vice president feels that way, can you imagine the ripple down effect of how many other people feel very, very similar? And so it's not that people are reluctant to talk about politics. It's that they want to do so like on the bigger picture. They don't want to, they're careful not to make it personal, because I do think there is definitely a sense of polarization in that this idea, I suppose, that if you say one good thing about one side, you're therefore affiliated with them, and you're then
Mm.
condoning everything that they do and condemning everything on the other side. And the reality is, I think it's a dangerous thing to look at things in such a black and white view when there's so many people that live in that gray area. And, I mean, to quote Richard Nixon, like, there's that silent majority of people that just want to live their day to day lives, that just want peace and quiet, and they just feel that they don't necessarily identify wholeheartedly with either party. That being said, I think it is going to be a fascinating few months because obviously we have the midterms coming up in November. And I think that will be really, really interesting to see. And what I'm fascinated by is at the moment, if you think about it, between now and November, Republicans have the majority in Congress. And this is, they might be viewing it, and President Trump might very well be viewing it as this is the time because most often they will lose that majority when it comes
Mm.
to the midterms. And it will be the last 2 years of Trump's presidency where it's much harder to pass things into law. But let's see. I don't want to be too speculative, but I just think it's going to be a fascinating few months.
I
I,
saw bits of that interview with the second lady. How was that being received in America?
I think a mixed bag. I think it's actually been mostly covered, from what I've seen anyway, mostly covered on networks that tend to lean left a little bit. And I think it sparked a conversation about, what does she honestly feel? I mean, she's asked in the interview, do you have a MAGA hat? And she's like, oh, I don't really wear hats. Like, I'm not really a hat person. And then obviously then the commentators cut to, 20 clips of her wearing different hats, and so I thought it was interesting. I think she was very clear in saying that she's not being pushed in any different direction, but at the same time, JD Vance has said, she's not a Christian, and has said, I believe she's Hindu, and has said very clearly that he would love to, while he respects that, he would love to see his wife
convert.
eventually want
Yeah.
to convert to Christianity. Yeah.
With that sort of look, I always kind of thought there was a weird kind of, I'm going to say contradiction, maybe not, but religious freedom is enshrined in America, but it's a very Christian lean and in God we trust on the currency and all that kind of stuff. But to try and hijack this towards something that is being just, I can't for the life of me fathom it. You've got Pete Hegseth and his pastor in the news for just this. I'm gonna say extreme Christian kind of views. They just seem very like when you're talking about the vice president's wife, and JD Vance saying publicly, one day maybe hopefully she will or whatever. But then you've got these government colleagues who are, you know, at least on the outside looking in, they seem like they're almost fundamentalists. Is that at all rippling through? And are people looking at them with a raised eyebrow or?
Yeah, I think it's been covered a lot, to be honest with you. So Pete Hegseth is an interesting guy to talk about. So in case you're not that familiar with his background, like he grew up in quite a normal, I would say, like middle class background. Definitely went to church on Sundays, did Bible studies, but I don't think came from a deeply overtly religious background. And there's many articles. In fact, there's actually a brilliant profile done in the Atlantic last October, and they basically say, look, he was a commentator, he was a TV personality on Fox and Friends for years. And a lot of people that the Atlantic spoke to said that he wasn't necessarily a overtly religious guy. Like, he wouldn't talk about it that much. He was much more of kind of, if he gave off any vibe at all, it was more like the fraternity brother kind of guy,
Mm.
What's interesting is that it seems that there was this pivotal moment in his life, 2017, 2018. And so back in 2017, he his second marriage ended, and it ended like the first marriage ended, in infidelity. He ended up having a child with his now wife, Jennifer, who was a colleague of his at Fox News. And it also was a time where he was overlooked. I can't remember, forgive me now, I can't remember the exact position in the first Trump administration. It was something to do with Veteran Affairs, but he felt that he was going to get that job and he was overlooked. And I think that was a big blow to him. He ended up very heavily drinking. I don't know if you remember at this time, but there was this infamous email that his mother sent to him that was
Yeah.
subsequently leaked to the New York Times, where she just obliterates him for his treatment of women. And by all accounts, when you think about all those things, it sounds like it was a real low point in his life. And suddenly, it was like as if he was a reborn Christian. And he wrote a book 2 years later. And there was definitely a shift in tone from him and how much he spoke about religion and God and Jesus Christ. And now today he's a defense secretary, and it's pretty extraordinary to read about. So even this week, like in the Washington Post, they're talking about how each month in the Pentagon he has these prayer evangelical prayer services, and that's something that not only did they not do before, but I think a lot of officials in past administrations even made a point of making their own personal religious beliefs quite private in
Mm.
order to not be affiliated, like to separate church and state in that respect. And he's having these, including, bringing a pastor to the Pentagon. His name is Doug Wilson, like you referenced. And this is a guy, just to provide some context here, and this is a guy who doesn't believe that women have the right to vote, and has expressed that quite openly and unapologetically in the past. And so it is fascinating to see this. I mean, even earlier today, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, prayed, started a group prayer for the troops, U.S. troops, and ended it, in the name of Jesus Christ, and that's just rhetoric. There's an undertone of Christianity that you don't normally see, even in Republican administrations in the past. And so it's been really fascinating to see. He also has some tattoos that have been talked about a lot in the media, the Jerusalem cross and things like that, part of the Crusades basically connected to that. And yeah, definitely a polarizing figure for sure, quite unapologetic about his views. And I think you're seeing a lot more of that overtly Christian undertone in this administration for sure, even more than there was, a lot more than there was, I think, in the first Trump administration.
It's all leading towards a bit of grifting as well, though, isn't it? It's all like they're planning for life after the administration, I think, anyway, that it's like he'll do the circuits then. If like he could also be gearing up for a presidential run himself. But he's definitely, it feels like a lot of the administration are like grifters and just
Well, Well, yeah, no, I think you raise a really interesting point, and I think the Atlantic actually had a similar point, slightly different, but the point that they made, which I thought was fascinating, was this idea that actually, when you look back, their argument is that Hegseth, as Defense Secretary, talked about religion a lot less in the beginning, and it kind of started to coincide with criticism of his role as Defense Secretary, and that they raised the question, is this, overtly religious rhetoric actually connected to the idea that now you can say I'm being attacked not for my performance as defense secretary, but for my religious beliefs and my Christianity. And so I'm not trying to answer that question. I just thought it was an interesting one to be raised. And I think, look, for sure, a lot of people in that administration are looking at life beyond the next 2.5 years and where are they going to go. And there's a huge cohort of the US population that are evangelical Christian. There's a very supportive base for him there. And it's funny that it goes back to what I'm saying. When people say, what is life like there day to day? I'm like, well, you're going to have to be specific about where we are because there's so many different areas. And I would be naive to suggest that I have a feel of what America is like because I live in the city in Boston when I
Mm.
haven't really explored life beyond a state that has really always voted Democrat, and I think it would be, I would feel much more qualified to talk about it were I living in either a swing state or in the Midwest or in the Bible Belt. And it's something that I learn about and I'm fascinated by as much as you are, but I'm at a similar distance to you in learning about it, if that makes any sense.
yeah, it makes
Yeah, of
perfect
course. Yeah,
sense. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's and it's all fascinating because like we're watching this play out and it's like it's reality TV in front of us, but that's not a good thing either because you're talking about global politics and the influence that has on just what's happening day to day for people.
Mm,
Like those kind of life outside of like the blue wall or the kind of the East Coast, which is more usually a kind of very, very blue in terms of how it votes. Like you're seeing things happen, some of these runoff elections or the was it a council? I can't remember the equivalent of a councillor or whatever in Florida in Mar, which went blue for a Democrat, which I'm sure
yeah.
Trump was delighted about. Texas seems to be another one that people are talking about potentially. You've got is it James Tallarico? Is that his name? Like there's these things that are popping up that are sort of challenging some of that traditional, or at least what we've seen over the last couple of elections, that strong red block of Republican slash MAGA, and I don't know. I kind of feel like you mentioned it, like November midterms coming up and everything else, and normally speaking, midterms you see the one in power kind of lose a little bit of ground. But it all just feels a little bit topsy-turvy, very hard to get a hold on. And in at the center of it all, that cult of personality with Trump feels like that's starting to fade a little bit because of some of these polarizing people he has around him, some of these people who, you know, aren't as strong and popular as he is with his base. It, I don't know, it feels like a powder keg to me.
Well, I think it all comes back to money, right? So
Hmm.
it's about the cost of living crisis, and politics is personal. And you can feel totally affiliated to someone, you can believe in someone, you can support them and vote for them time and time again. But if you don't feel like you're seeing results in your own pocket and it's not positively impacting you and your family, that's where you can take a step back. And at the moment, there was a poll released today where President Trump has an approval rating of 31%. To contextualize that, I think that's like one of the all-time lows for him. And he will absolutely be looking at those polls. He's somebody that quite openly is fascinated by numbers, who quotes polls even when there are questions raised about them. But he will definitely be looking at, of course, for the midterms, and I think it'll have a big impact on his policy towards Iran. I mean, when you look at it, the cost of living is going to be hugely impacted by the Strait of Hormuz closing. 20% of the world's oil and gas passes through that strait. That's something that they knew before. And so, what is the impact of that going to be? How are people going to feel it? And, of course, on the one hand, in the beginning, people in the US can feel like, well, where even is Iran? Like, it's so far away. I've never been there. I've never been anywhere near there. We don't have troops on the ground in Iran. Like, they can feel disconnected to it until the trickle effect comes and people start to feel a pinch in their pockets. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I don't know if you saw today, I'm going off on a tangent here about Iran.
Your
I hope
grand?
you don't mind.
No, good. Go for it. Love tangents.
um, but I'm some woman for a tangent. Unbelievable. But I can't even sometimes remember where I started. So you'll have to guide me back if I get totally
Yeah.
lost. But earlier today, President Trump came out and it's very clear. So, just over a month ago, Israel and the US launched these joint strikes on Iran. And I think, honestly, after each day, you've seen a widening of the gap between their policies and their goals.
Hmm.
They'll never say that overtly, but it's quite clear. And what's interesting is that earlier today, President Trump said Iran has reached out and asked for a ceasefire, and I'm not going to consider that until the Strait of Hormuz is open. Now, a spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry in the last hour came out and said, we did not ask for that. And so it's hard to even get a sense of, what is actually happening, what's true. And, I don't want to oversimplify this or be flippant about it or, disrespectful to how serious this is. But, we obliterated their nuclear weapons. They have nuclear weapons that could kill us in a matter of weeks. We don't need your help. Why didn't you show up for us? Get your own oil. We don't care. It was only a test. We're going to leave NATO. We're not going to leave NATO. We're going to have troops on the ground. We're not going to have troops on the ground. We are going to be here for a few weeks. It could be a few months. We could finish this week. We want regime change. We don't want regime change. We don't care if we have it or not. So, I think it's been, I wonder, like, purposely confusing in order to stop even trying to keep up to speed with this. But I think, again, I don't want to sound flippant about this. There's very real ramifications for it. Thousands of people of innocent civilians have been killed. I never want to be flippant about that. And there's so much instability in the region. And, I also think too, like, President Trump is, very openly saying now and said in an interview to Reuters, I think yesterday, that he's absolutely considering withdrawing the US from NATO.
Hmm.
And I mean, that would be just absolutely, it's hard to overstate the impact something like that would have. And these are all like, when I got into journalism, my approach that I took, I was always fascinated by international relations, always interested by geopolitics. And the approach that I took was, okay, I can't know everything that's happening in the world, but how do I get a foundation level of knowledge? This is what I try to say to everybody. I'm like, just the foundations, right? So that then day to day, you can join the dots. And one of the first things that I learned about was NATO, because it just felt omnipresent in every conversation around geopolitics. It was a deterrence. It just was one of those organizations that I felt the way I learned about it, the way I read about it was rock solid. And this was, I suppose this was probably when President Obama was in office, I guess. And certainly what I knew first about NATO, the first time I would have heard about it, like when I was really young, was off the back of 9/11. When you
Hmm.
think about, Article 5 of the NATO treaty is, attack on one is attack on all. The only time that's ever actually been used is
Yeah.
off the back of 9/11. And so, these institutions that you just think are going to be there, in perpetuity. And it's just a fascinating thing. It's why I'm so fascinated by journalism. The idea that questions are raised about US involvement in that is extraordinary. And I think sometimes, I'm very guilty of getting caught up in the day to day headlines and the news and the trickle of developments. And then sometimes you take a step back and you're like, wow, wow, there's a lot
Yeah.
going
Yeah,
on.
But
There's
yeah.
a lot of significant things going on. Yeah.
yeah, it's hard not to though, especially like I mean, not to go Steve Bannon and talk about flooding the zone, but like you even touched on it there, just the amount of flip flopping and twisting and changing on the day to day that comes out of, you know, I know it's Trump, but it's still the office of the president of the United States, where like comments like it'll be over when we have complete and unconditional surrender. How we know it's over? I'll feel it in my bones. These kind of comments that are just so
Yeah.
out there. And as you said, the NATO thing, like even today, as we were recording this, like Keir Starmer put out what I thought was a very interesting and strong statement about kind of aligning Britain closer to the EU. This uh, a very kind of pushback on some of the stuff that Trump has been coming out with because of this, oh, they're not helping us, we don't need help, but they're not helping us, or
Yeah.
Spain and other countries closing their airspace and all these things that just the thread has been pulled on what for the last century has been the very foundation of strength and civility in the West. And
Yeah.
I know you're not a fan of speculation, and I know you like to try and stick to the facts, Hill. But it just
Here we go. Here we
no.
go.
I mean, no, I've set that up, and it's going to be very underwhelming. But like, it feels like it's just like one dude who just we can't keep up with because he changes the story and changes. There's no such thing as a fact with this man, and as a result, like he's such a bad actor that
Well, Danny, you did say about reality TV. I'm convinced he thinks he's still a reality TV star. Like we're
but
seeing stuff every day. Like Hill was talking about, it affecting the everyday people. I seen a
mm,
report on CNN there, maybe less than 10 days ago, where it was they were reaching out to the farmers of the red states in the South and who voted for Trump and who are basically MAGA. And they're all gone against them now because fertilizers cost too much, and the fertilizer is coming from Iran, and it's come from the Middle East, and they're not getting it, and
mm,
it's double, treble the price. So this man then tells lies and says just to suit the market, oh, it's over, like it'll be over by the weekend. Like he said 10 days ago, it'll be over by the weekend, and then as Hill said, the Iranian foreign secretary came out and said, no, we're ready for ground troops. Like you want to obtain our oil, we're ready. We're waiting. It's an
I
absolute
think
disaster. And I think he thinks the problem with the reality TV aspect of viewing all of this world politics since, I don't know, the last 4 years is that there's no accountability in anything. Like, I mean, look what the Israeli government passed yesterday. I mean,
yeah,
there's no accountability. There's no questioning. There's nothing. And it's just, as you said, just throw something else on. Caroline Levitt will tell the reporter, I'm not answering that because I don't like you. You're spreading bad news or fake news. It's just no accountability whatsoever.
yeah,
yeah,
I think I think as well, what is also I think an important point to remember as well is for the US, it's very clear it would be very, very unpopular to put troops on the ground
mm,
in Iran. And I think there's a wide understanding across the board that there are questions to be answered about the pretext for these strikes and the immediate threat that Iran posed. I'm not defending the Iranian regime, but I think we have to be honest and speak in fact. This idea that missiles, long range missiles, were about to hit the US and they had the ability within weeks to create a nuclear missile has been disproven by nearly every credible expert. I'm not the expert on it, but I listen to the experts. And I think also as well, the idea that uh, an Iranian regime that has been in place since 1979 and is really fighting for its survival is not going to go, you know, all out. And if we're going down, we're taking everyone down with us. I think that was naive. That what did they want? Like, what did they expect? If they start by saying and calling on people in Iran to take the streets. And this is your opportunity. It's a once in a decades opportunity to overthrow this regime. Well, the regime are also listening to that. And
Yeah.
so, and one thing I think actually what's been really interesting to see unfold, obviously I've followed what's happening in Iran for years in terms of from a geopolitical point of view, but I can't say that I wouldn't ever pretend to have been an expert on Iran and the structure of power in Iran. But what I think has been really fascinating is this idea that they killed the Ayatollah on the first day, and here they are, and the regime seems to be very much in control of the day-to-day running of the country. And they had clearly prepared for a scenario like this,
Yeah.
where they had diluted the power, not diluted the powers. That's not the right word to say, but I suppose.
Decentralized.
Uh, well, what I had read is that basically they had given authority to people much lower down the chain. You can make decisions. You don't need to hear from the foreign secretary if he's killed. You don't need to hear from the defense secretary if he's killed. And I think that's been really, really interesting and maybe utterly underestimated by the US. I don't know. I can't speak to that. I wait for the documentaries in a few years' time, which will be fascinating. But I just think, if you're talking about a country that's being hit, the US is not being hit day to day. The US does not have troops on the ground. It's a totally different thing. And so, yeah, I find it all fascinating. And I always try and take a step back and think about this through a historical lens and how we're going to learn about it and how we're going to think about it. I think about Hugo, in 20 years' time, and he's going to be saying, how did this all unfold? Because I look back at things in history and I say, what was the build up to something like this? How did we get here? And I think to tell the story, you have to tell the story about domestic politics in the US, and you really have to tell the story about domestic politics in Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
Absolutely.
that's like there are so many layers and nuances to all of this that a 30, 40 minute conversation that we have, it doesn't even scratch the surface,
We're not going to fix
unfortunately,
it.
Yeah.
But like I'm fascinated by all of it. I think everybody is fascinated by all of it. You were saying there'll be documentaries and we all look forward to watching them. There'll be books, Hill. So I look forward to you talking to the future writers of those books because
Yeah.
this is I mean, there'll be no shortage of people who want to give their take or share their story or, peel back the curtain, whatever way you want to look at it. Unconscious, well, we've said like they don't have troops on the ground. I want to caveat that with the word yet because it's still a real part. Like isn't there troops move where they have moved from towards Japan down to the Middle East? There's some other I don't know the battalion numbers or the whatever, but like they are moving troops to the region. And I get it could be a show of strength. It could be, you don't want to mess with us. Look at all, what we have here. Like we could obliterate you, using that word again. But it's still a possibility, right? As we're recording this, like, it's still a real
It's
possibility.
mental though. Like Iran has like a population of about 90 million people.
Mm.
So as
Mm.
much as we're talking about the vastness of the states, Iran is quite vast. So how do we like ground troops? I just think is crazy, crazy to be
Like,
considering
It,
that. And
it, it,
he keeps threatening it though. Every
it
second
is, but
day.
but again, look and go back to try to sound like this is a coherent conversation and all that. Go back to what Hill said earlier about Pete Hegseth and this sort of Christian crusade.
Yeah.
Like I no doubt there's an element of him in his role and that notion of this is almost a holy war. Now that's me speculating. No,
I'm convinced they thought it was going to be a Venezuela in and out job.
oh, big time.
And now they're
Yeah.
just outstaying their welcome and it's there's he
What,
just
what a
wants that he
what a
wants that
lovely way
oil.
to put it. They're outstaying their welcome.
Yeah, yeah. And now they want all that
But but
oil.
but when you bring up Venezuela, I think what's really interesting, again, I go back to the idea of taking yourself out of the day-to-day headlines and looking at things
Mm.
through a historical lens. And when we tell this story in 20 years' time, you have to talk about how, uh, you know, 6, 7 weeks prior, they went into Venezuela, they captured Maduro, brought him back to the US, and they took control of the oil reserves.
Yeah.
And, I'm not trying to join dots that are not clarified and confirmed yet, but why do you need control of those oil reserves? If you know what I mean. So I find that all very, very fascinating. How people will tell us, how people will join the dots, because of course, from a historical lens, it's like a much bigger overview of what's happening. And so I find that all to be absolutely fascinating. I really do. I think it's such a people say, is it tough to cover the news? And I try to cover it on Instagram a lot, but the news cycle has never felt positive. I've never had a time
Mm.
since I've become a journalist and I've said, oh, everything's really positive right now. So you have to move yourself away from the idea of, oh, it's so negative, because that's what the news cycle is. That's the sad reality. Whether we're talking about natural disasters or man made or geopolitical or wars, like whatever it is, it always has a difficult undertone to it. But I find it absolutely fascinating, this idea. I was obsessed with history when I was growing up, and now I'm just watching it all unfold. And I appreciate that I am watching it unfold. I know that this is all very, very consequential. Like all these moments, like, is the US going to leave NATO? If they do, I mean, that's just going to be a massive moment in our recent history that we're going to look at for decades to come. And so, what was the build up to it? So all these things are absolutely fascinating to me. And I think even, just to tie it back, like when we talk about my podcast Booked In and the interview I did with Eddie Honig, and there's all these standalone topics. So it's like the US presidents and the Justice Department. But then actually when you get into the weeds of it, you see the impact that it had. So, specifically if you look at 2016 and um uh, Bill Clinton was seen. I'm going off on a tangent now, so rein me in whenever you want. But in the summer of 2016, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are very much front runners in their parties. They're going to be going toe to toe in November. And Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, is on a plane with Bill Clinton, and they have a conversation. They say the conversation was just about like, how's your family, how's everything, da, da. But there's this investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails, and so it raises so many questions that in the end, Jim Comey steps in because there wasn't a special counsel called, and we know exactly what happened there. He within
Yeah.
days before the election, he reopened the investigation. I don't think we can ever say for definite what impact that had, but Hillary Clinton will definitely say that Jim Comey decapitated her ahead of the election. And so you
Absolutely.
just think about all of these stories and all of these developments and all of the ties that they have and the impacts and the ripple effects. And that's where I just think it's a privilege to be a journalist, as difficult as it is sometimes to be. I don't blame you for shooting the messenger sometimes, but it is a privilege to try and tell stories in a way that people can connect their own dots and see the significance of what happens and what is the ripple effect of something a decade down the line. It's extraordinary.
It is, and it's mad. There's always moments, and I know a much smaller scale because it's only ceremonial, but it reminds me of when Sean Gallagher in the Irish presidential election was romping home to
Mm,
victory. And then the last, the front line with Pat Kenny, then is completely by Twitter, like by an
Yeah.
anonymous account on Twitter, completely decapitated his whole presidential campaign, and Michael D got that first term. But it's funny, like in regards to uh, the future, how will that be reported? How will the Hillary Clinton and Trump kind of the lead up to it, the whole campaign, how will that be reported? Because some of the stuff we seen on that was stuff we'd never seen before in terms of the disrespect to it. Well, whatever, like, the words that, he was so ungentlemanlike, so to speak, or not really like a politician. People were laughing when he put his name forward for it, and now we're living through his second term. It's crazy.
yeah, yeah, and I often think too. I wonder how President Biden's going to be talked about in 2 to 3 decades. Is he actually going to be framed? Like, is it a possibility that he's happy to be framed, or is it a possibility that he's going to be framed as just the president that was sandwiched in between both Trump terms? I find all of it just really, really interesting. Or I think about 2008 and how many Democrats in the US felt this sense of hope. The first Black president was elected. I would say probably, along with Bill Clinton, the most popular and well liked
Yeah.
president. And then, less than a decade later, you had President Trump coming in for his first term in office. And so, look, all of it I just find extraordinary and fascinating. And it's a news cycle that sometimes you're trying to keep your head above water and just saying, oh my God, what's going to happen today? But I really enjoy it. It gives me an adrenaline. Not to ever be flippant about it, but I feel privileged to be one of the journalists just taking it all in
Absolutely.
and watching it.
Yeah, no, you're dead right. And I think that the question about Joe Biden, as I said, I'm in the middle of the I think it's Original Sin, Jake Tapper's book
Oh
about
yeah.
That and like it, it's very, very. I'm enjoying it, but certainly, it's painting a warts and all picture of that whole scenario of Biden saying I'm going to go for re-election. The problems then in the Democratic Party around people not believing he was able, not believing he could win, but not speaking up or not being willing to speak up. The
Hmm.
lengths that the Biden camp went to try and stop. It's really, really fascinating.
Can
So
I can
yeah,
I tell you that so that book Original Sin is co-authored by Alex Thompson,
yes, thank
and
you. Yeah.
Alex Thompson works with Axios, and he I interviewed him summer 2024. So he had a book deal with Simon and Schuster to release a book about President Biden, and it was signed I think in 2023, scheduled to be released early 2024. And he was very professional, and he's a fantastic journalist, Alex. But reading between the lines, so the book deal was suddenly cancelled. It was confirmed, it was advertised, he was writing the book, he put so much work into it, and suddenly it was cancelled. And if you look at his reporting then in Axios, it was very clear that he was one of the very, very few reporters that was talking about these concerns that were being raised in the White House about President Biden's mental ability to do the job
Mhm.
and certainly to run for a second term. And he was absolutely vilified online. I mean, and to the point that, and this is a wider conversation we could have about US politics and the structure of it all, because he was being talked about as though he was disloyal. He
Yeah,
wasn't a Democrat, he was a journalist. What are we
yeah,
talking about? You know? And so, what I thought was really interesting, and I said it to him, I was like, was your book cancelled because they thought it was going to be a fluff piece and then they didn't like it and they thought it would have a negative impact on the 2024 election? And he was like, I appreciate your question. But it was very, very clear that it was. And so, we can talk all day about President Trump and the unpredictability of the news cycle, and all of those things are valid. I think it's also very important to talk about the fact that there was this pressure on a journalist
yeah,
out of fear that it would support Donald Trump to tell the truth. And his reporting is impeccable. And I think that that is also absolutely fascinating. And so I was delighted to see that the book did come out because I think it's a very important historical record. But I think it's an indictment of the US system, the media system, the political system, all of it. That a book like that, with just telling it as it is, wasn't allowed to be published before the election. And I wonder, had it been, would it have actually in the long run been better? Like, I don't know. Who knows?
yeah.
But I just thought that that was absolutely fascinating. I'm delighted you're listening to it. I think it's really, really good. I also thought
Mm,
Kamala Harris's book, what was it, 107 days,
mm.
was really excellent as well. And so again, like this is the thing. You look at the day-to-day headlines, and then you also want to take a step back and be like, what was actually going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for keeping me honest there because I mentioned the book twice and I didn't mention Alex once. So thanks,
No,
because
no, not at all. That's not what I meant.
no, no,
Not,
but
don't
no,
worry.
no, I know, but it's more so like the book doesn't happen without him. It's not fair of me just to constantly reference the guy off the news who I see on TV, but not the other guy in the back.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So, but Hill,
sure.
it's always a pleasure chatting to you, and I'm going to try and put you on the spot. And as I said earlier, I know you don't
Oh,
like
go on.
speculation, right? We've mentioned the midterms, we've mentioned all the chaos, we've mentioned all the madness and everything else to wrap us up in a neat little bow with an absolute wild card question.
A neat little bow.
Is there even just a modicum of a chance that all of this is playing out in a way to try and somehow disrupt, stop, interfere with midterm elections because the writing is on the wall in terms of the Republicans are going to lose control of Congress?
No, I don't think that this is being done to stop midterms. I think this is being done in advance of midterms.
Mm,
So I think the timing is definitely significant for sure, but I don't think there's any goal of like, oh, we're going to stop midterm elections. I know that they know that that's a step too far. I think it's taking control. And actually, to be honest, I briefly mentioned Israel earlier. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu knows this is it was now or never. Like this is the chance because they wouldn't have launched strikes, in the weeks before the midterms.
yeah,
And I think there would have been absolute uproar if they had done so in say a Democrat controlled Senate or House of Representatives. And so for me, I actually think it was more strategic. Yes, the midterms were considered, but not to have them be not to stop them going ahead, just more thinking about timing of the strategic timing that they had, an opportunity that they had to launch strikes now. And remember, they did this without congressional approval as well. I mean, I know in the beginning, 28th of February, they launched these strikes, and a lot of comparisons were being made to the war in Iraq and the worries about it being a wider conflict and there being a vacuum and no real plan about where to go from here, especially when he was mentioning regime change in the beginning.
Yeah.
But I think there are very important differences. The lead up to the war in Iraq, albeit flawed on the pretext and not even flawed, incorrect, the pretext for that war, there was congressional approval, and it was months. Like there was a vote in Congress and everything. So there wasn't a vote in Congress on these strikes, and so there is a significant difference. And I also think too, not only is there midterms in early November, there's also a general election. I think it's the 26th of October in Israel, and so those few weeks, maybe I'll come back on the podcast because I think it's going to be a really, really fascinating time.
Absolutely.
And I'm really intrigued. Everyone's always intrigued by US politics, as they should be, because it has such an impact. And I get that completely. I'm really fascinated to see the first general election in Israel since October 7th. What is the outcome of that going to be? Because, it's important. Like sometimes I read all these headlines, but I struggle to really understand what Israeli society think. And I know they're not a monolith, they're quite the opposite, actually. There's secular Jews, more Orthodox. But I'm really, really fascinated because of the system in Israel. How is that going to unfold? And is it going to be one of those cobbled together, very weak from the beginning coalitions with Netanyahu at the head, going into coalition with anyone who will do it, no matter what their political views are? Because that's how we got to where we are today. I know you want to. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but
no.
This death penalty bill in Israel that's just been passed is so important to shine a light on. And it's also to understand how we got here, you have to understand Israeli politics. And so they had, election after election, like year after year, for multiple years before 2023. And there was an election where Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted to get back into power. There was a coalition before that, where Naftali Bennett was Prime Minister for a while. And it was a coalition, I think maybe about 7 parties. And honestly, one of the few things they had in common was their hatred for Netanyahu. They just wanted him out. And so in the next election, they got together this fragile coalition. And Netanyahu, in order to get back into power, he's been on and off in power since 1996. He had to go into office with right-wing parties that are, led by the likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir. He has the party that led this bill. And Netanyahu voted in favor of this death penalty bill, and
just to smooth them over for October.
Well, they would have their support of his coalition was connected to the passing of this bill, and they made they said that under no uncertain terms, And so I just think it's important to understand the domestic dynamics at play in Israel as well.
Absolutely, and these are the guys, as you said, like the death penalty bill passed, but they were wearing like noose pins on their lapel and that kind of thing. This there's something deeply unsettling about how all this has kind of gone down and how all that is playing out. And as you said, like understanding, and it's maybe only in the last couple of years that Israeli politics has kind of really jumped off the page to people with everything that's gone on. But it's given the global impacts of what we're seeing, and given what we've had to endure in terms of seeing every day play out over, everything that they were doing in Gaza and Palestine over the last couple of years, that awareness is crucial. Anyone that has to cozy up to the far right to stay in power, it's a very, very murky place to be in.
It's bleak.
Yeah. And as you've been saying all through this, like, the news very rarely gives us kind of positive stuff. It's always, what is it? If it bleeds, it leads, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Sorry.
No.
One day I'll have a very positive story to tell. I'll be the first to jump on this podcast. I can't wait to record it. But for the meantime, I think the reality is it feels like a particularly angry world right now. And I just try and, my goal in that is just to try and make it a bit more I don't know, like if you come to my page, that it doesn't feel so negative and so overwhelming that you feel like you just want to disconnect from the news cycle. I have this constant balance of trying to say, here's the reality, here are the facts, but I want you to stay and I want you to stay involved and I want you to keep caring about what's happening in the world. And at the same time, then be able to switch off and enjoy your life as you should. And so it's a delicate balance. I can't say I always get it right, but it's important to know what's happening in the world around us, even when it doesn't affect us day to day and on our doorstep.
Dead right,
Absolutely.
and you're doing a good job because it's look, more and more people just go to social media, consume news, and that is a dangerous game in itself. So you're kind of
Yeah.
fighting the good fight and doing what you're doing because, as me and Mero constantly say, we're all agenda and opinion with very little fact sometimes. So I'd say
Yeah.
you're the antithesis of that for us. But look, Hill, as always, thank you so much for your time. We
Thanks
will
so
take
much,
you.
Hill.
We'll take you up on that and definitely bring you back on post midterms and post Israeli election later in the year. If people
Yeah.
want to follow you, if they're not already, it's News by Hill. The follower count still a great topic for your dad, is it? Or
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Unbelievable. And he was so giddy last year. Last June I got to 50,000 and he just started talking about it. He was like, that's nearly twice the amount of people that go to Thomond Park to watch the rugby. I was like, no, I don't think about that, Dad. Like I wouldn't care at all. But no, he's
Brilliant.
he's very excited. And I took a 6 month break after Hugo was born, and I just randomly one day came back, and I hadn't told him, and I waited just to see, just out of curiosity. I was like, how long is it going to take him? Anyway, 3.5 minutes later, he's like, "Oh!" Exclamation marks. He's like, "You're back!"
That's
He was
brilliant.
giddy. He was so excited. Yeah, it's very sweet. Like he's very
So
very
sweet.
excited.
love that.
Yeah,
And that can be
yeah.
the tagline now. Hilary McGann, she'd filled Thomond Park twice. That would be
Yeah.
amazing.
I love
Hill,
it.
as always, thank you so much. And we look forward to the next time we get to catch up with you.
Talk to you in October.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys. I love
Thanks,
chatting to
Phil.
you both. I'm glad you're both doing well.
Great chat with Hill, as always.
Brillo. Absolutely brilliant. What a absolute lovely, lovely lady.
Yeah, and I am delighted that she's back doing her news breakdowns, doing all the things that she does really well, and that her podcast Booked In is back. Because as I said, it gives me somewhere to direct the increase in Audible credits that I seem to have, and I'm a big fan of an audiobook. So if you haven't checked out Booked In, give it a listen and take some of the recommendations. Um, she won't steer you wrong. Mero, let's
Yes.
not let's not keep you from your lemsip any further, mate. Where can people get our previous episodes, should they so choose?
You can go to WTSpod.com or you can search WTS Pod on any podcast provider. Podcast Republic, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Podbean, anywhere, everywhere you get a podcast, just put in WTS Pod.
Indeed,
On
indeed.
we're also on Instagram at WTS Pod. He's at Danjo Murray. I'm at Merrigamania. And until the next time, we will talk to you soon.
We will. Somebody sent me a message on Instagram asking, will we do video and like would we do like TikTok or YouTube? No. Like we're on YouTube, but it's just the audio. So I
Yeah,
apologize. We are not so technically gifted that we will pursue this any further than we already do. So
yeah.
you'll
We're
just
happy
have,
the way it is. And it's
you'll
been
just
like this for 11
yeah,
years. So good luck.
exactly. Yeah. Think of
Thanks
us
for
as
listening, though.
your friendly traditional podcast. We're not into the modern anyway, look, as Meryl said, thanks for listening. Do appreciate it. All feedback's good feedback. But until next time,
Clear eyes.
cool hearts
Clear throat. Bye.
and moves.